She caught the falling ridgepole, the one that would have crushed the child, and held it. If this story moves you, do me a favor before we go any further. Subscribe to the channel, follow it all the way to the end, because the part that will stay with you comes late, and leave the name of your town down in the comments so we can all watch together how far this story travels. Now, let me carry you back to where it truly began. She arrived on the afternoon stage, the only passenger left. The coachman had looked at her with a flat, incurious gaze when she paid her fare, a gaze she knew well. It was a look that measured and dismissed in a single, practiced motion. He saw a woman, large and plain. He saw a face that was not white, bones that were not delicate, and a silence that was not demure. He saw a problem of logistics, a heavy weight to be hauled and deposited, and then forgotten. Her name was May, though no one had asked it. She stepped down from the coach into a wind that tasted of dust and defeat. It was a thin, complaining wind, one that scoured the paint from the false-fronted buildings and carried the scent of alkali from the flats. She held a single, cloth-wrapped bundle tied with twine. Inside was a change of clothes, a whetstone, a small pouch of savings sewn into the lining, and a half-eaten rice cake wrapped in wax paper. It was everything she owned. She had learned long ago to travel light. She had learned that the things you carried on your back were less of a burden than the things you carried in your heart. She had learned that a still face was a fortress, and that silence was a shield that few men had the patience to breach. They would see the stillness and call it stupidity. They would see the silence and call it submission. They would see the bigness of her body and call it coarse. Let them. Their judgment was a storm she had learned to weather by standing still, a rock in a river of contempt. Her bigness, her color, her too-muchness. That was the story told about her before she ever spoke a word. In the mission school, she had been too big for the little wooden chairs, her hands too clumsy for the delicate needlework. On the farms where she worked, she was too strong, a disquieting force who could lift what men could not. In the city laundries, she was too quiet, her presence a silent rebuke to the gossiping women. She was always too much of what they did not want, and not enough of what they did. Too big, too brown, too quiet, too plain. So she built her armor. It was forged in the heat of their stares and hammered into shape by their casual cruelties. It was a heavy thing to wear, this armor of indifference. It made her shoulders ache and her spirit weary. But it was necessary. It was the only thing that had kept her from shattering. She stood for a moment in the dusty street of the town, which was hardly a town at all. It was a handful of weary buildings clinging to a vein of murky water. The sign on the largest building, the general store, was faded to a ghost of its former self. Hope had come here once and died. She could feel its bones in the dust. The directions she had been given were simple. Follow the creek west to the Bar T Ranch. The man's name was Thomas Barringer. His letter had been brief, written in a cramped, desperate hand. He needed a cook and a housekeeper. His last one had left. Everyone, it seemed, was leaving. She started walking. The land talked, and she had learned its language long ago. It was a language of bent grasses and thirsty soil, of cracked earth and the particular shade of green that spoke of sickness. Here, the creek was slow and brackish, its edges crusted with a white, powdery rime. Alkali. It was leaching from the soil, poisoning the water. Further on, she saw the fences. The posts were loose in their holes, the wires sagging like a weary sigh. A fence was the spine of a ranch. A broken fence meant a broken back. She saw cattle in the distance, their heads low, their coats dull and shaggy. They were not thriving. They were enduring. The ranch house was no better. It was a good house once, built of solid timber, but now it slumped into itself. The porch sagged. A shutter hung from a single hinge, banging a mournful rhythm in the wind. Grief lived here. It was as plain as the peeling paint in the untended garden, where weeds choked the last of the rose bushes. A man sat on the porch steps, his shoulders hunched. He was not old, but he was worn to a nub. His face was a mask of exhaustion, his eyes fixed on nothing. He did not look up as she approached, her soft-soled shoes making almost no sound on the packed earth. She stopped a few feet from the steps. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind and the banging shutter. Finally, he seemed to notice her shadow. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes a pale, washed-out blue. They held a deep and abiding sorrow. "You the one from the advertisement?" he asked. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. May gave a single, short nod. He looked her over, his gaze as flat and tired as the landscape. It held none of the usual contempt, only a profound weariness. He was too tired for prejudice. "Place is a wreck," he said, not as an apology, but as a statement of fact. "Pay is $10 a month and board." Last woman couldn't take it. May's eyes were not on him. They were on the white crust along the creek bed, visible even from here. They were on the sickly yellow cast of the cottonwoods that lined its banks. "It is not the work that drove her off," May said. Her voice was low and calm, and used but clear. "It is the water. It is killing your land. Soon it will kill your animals. Then it will kill you." The man stared at her. The emptiness in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of something else. Surprise. He had expected a simple woman, a cook, a cleaner. He had not expected this. He straightened up slightly, his focus narrowing on her face. Her face was still, her expression unreadable, but her eyes were certain. "Say that again," he said, his voice quiet. "The alkali," she repeated, pointing with her chin toward the creek. "It rises from the soil. The water is poison. That is why your cattle are sick and your garden is dead. That is why this place is dying." He was silent for a long time, looking from her to the creek and back again. He had seen the white powder, of course. He had tasted the bitterness in the well water. But he had thought it was just the way of things in this dry country. He had not understood it as an active, creeping death. This strange, large woman had been here for 5 minutes, and she had named the sickness that had been slowly strangling him for 3 years. He pushed himself to his feet. He was tall, but she was nearly his height, and broader in the shoulder. He met her calm gaze. For the first time, he saw not her race or her size, but the deep, steady intelligence in her eyes. "Can you fix it?" he asked. It was not a challenge. It was a plea. May looked at the dying land, at the grieving house, at the broken man before her. She gave another single, deliberate nod. "All right," Thomas Berenger said, the words tasting strange in his mouth. He had not said, "all right," and meant it in a very long time. "The job is yours." She began the very next day. Thomas showed her the wagon shed, where tools lay rusted and disorganized. She found a sack of gypsum powder, caked hard with disuse. It was meant for plastering, but she knew its other use. She knew the old chemistry of the earth. She spent the first week not in the kitchen, but on the land. With a borrowed shovel that felt light in her powerful hands, she dug a series of deep, narrow trenches, laying them out in a herringbone pattern across the worst of the alkali flats. The work was brutal. The sun was a hammer, the earth was iron. Thomas watched her from the porch, a mug of cold coffee untouched in his hand. He had hired a cook, and she was digging ditches as if she were burying a giant. Jed, the old ranch hand, watched her too. He had lost his left arm to a threshing machine years ago and was made of little more than sinew, gristle, and suspicion. "Woman's got no place doing a man's work," he grumbled to Thomas, spitting a stream of tobacco juice near the porch steps. Thomas didn't answer. He just watched as May broke the caked gypsum with the back of a spade, her movements economical and strong. She loaded the powder into a wheelbarrow and began spreading it over the poisoned ground, her arms swinging in a steady, rhythmic arc. She worked from sunup to sundown, her face a mask of concentration. She did not seem to tire. She seemed to draw strength from the earth itself. After she had spread the gypsum, she diverted a small part of the creek into the high end of her trench system. The water, now carrying the dissolved gypsum, seeped into the soil. The calcium in the gypsum displaced the sodium of the alkali, pushing the poison deep into the earth, below the level of the roots. It was a slow, patient magic. It was chemistry. It was work. While she waited for the land to heal, she turned to the house. She scoured the kitchen until the floorboards shone. She mended the broken shutter and oiled its hinges, silencing its mournful complaint. She found the ledgers and account books piled in a dusty corner of the main room, a testament to a life falling into disarray. She stacked them neatly, her fingers tracing the faded ink. It was in the kitchen that she first truly met the child. Her name was Sarah. She was 6 years old and as silent as a shadow. She had not spoken a word, Thomas had told her, since her mother died a year before. She would appear in doorways, a small, watchful ghost with large, dark eyes, and then vanish if May so much as looked at her directly. May did not try to force a connection. She understood that a wounded heart was like a wounded animal. It had to come to you in its own time. So she pretended the child was not there. She would talk to herself as she worked, her low voice a steady murmur in the quiet house. She would tell stories to the pots and pans, tales from her own childhood of clever monkeys and stubborn river gods. She left small offerings on the kitchen table, a perfectly ripe wild plum, a piece of bread spread with precious molasses. One day, she spent an hour carving a tiny, intricate bird from a scrap of pine. She set it on the table and went about her work. For a long time, the bird sat untouched. Then, from the corner of her eye, May saw a small hand dart out, snatch the bird, and disappear. She did not turn. She kept kneading her dough, a slow, secret smile touching her lips for the first time in a long time. The breakthrough with Jed came a week later. The well pump, a heavy, temperamental contraption of iron gears and leather belts, seized up. Jed and Thomas wrestled with it for an hour, their faces red with exertion, their curses staining the air. The main gear had slipped its housing, and they could not generate enough leverage to force it back into place. "It's no use," Jed finally gasped, leaning against the well housing, his one good arm trembling. "We'll need to fetch a block and tackle from town." May had been watching from the kitchen doorway. She walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at the pump, her eyes assessing the angles and the weight. "Move aside," she said quietly. Jed snorted. "This ain't kneading dough, woman." May ignored him. She braced her feet, wrapped her strong hands around the cold iron of the gear, and found her purchase. She did not just pull. She used her whole body, her legs, her back, her sheer mass a source of immense, grounded power. For a moment, nothing happened. The iron groaned in protest. A vein stood out on her temple. Then, with a deep, grating screech, the gear shifted. It slid back into its housing with a solid, satisfying clunk. She stepped back, breathing evenly. She looked at Jed, her face still and unreadable. Jed stared at the pump. He stared at her. He worked his jaw for a moment, then spat a long stream of tobacco juice. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. It was the highest praise he had ever given anyone. From that day on, he stopped calling her woman and started calling her May. His suspicion was replaced by a grudging, absolute respect. The child came next. A few days after the incident with the pump, May was in the small garden, pulling the tenacious weeds from around the gasping rose bushes. She felt a presence and knew it was Sarah, watching from the edge of the porch. May kept working, her hands gentle as she cleared the earth. After a few minutes, she heard a soft scuffing sound. The child had come down the steps. She stood a few feet behind May, holding something in her hand. May continued her work, her heart beating a little faster. "That one," a tiny voice said, barely a whisper. May froze. It was the first word she had ever heard the child speak. She turned her head slowly. Sarah was pointing a small, grubby finger at a thick, thorny weed that was strangling the base of the largest rose bush. "That one," Sarah repeated, her voice a little stronger. "It's the bad one." May looked at the weed, then back at the child. She gave a slow, solemn nod. "Yes," she said. "It is the bad one." She reached out, and, with a firm, careful pull, ripped the weed from the ground, roots and all. Sarah watched her, her expression serious. Then, she stepped forward and handed May what she had been holding. It was the small, carved bird. May took it, her large fingers gentle on the delicate wood. She looked at the child, and for the first time, she let her smile show. It was not the secret smile from the kitchen. It was a real one, warm and wide. Sarah did not smile back, but she did not run away. She stood her ground, a small, solemn soldier who had finally chosen her side. The land began to answer her. Along the trenches, new shoots of grass appeared, a vibrant, healthy green. The water in the creek began to run clearer. One evening, Thomas stood with her by the newly mended fence line, looking out over the pasture. The cattle were grazing, their heads up, their movements more energetic. "I haven't seen it look this alive in years," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. He looked at May, at her strong profile outlined against the setting sun. "How did you know what to do?" "My grandfather taught me," she said simply. "He said the earth is honest. If you listen, it will tell you what it needs. It was a month after her arrival that the buggy appeared. It was a fine, handsome thing, lacquered black and pulled by a perfectly matched pair of gray geldings. It moved with a smooth, arrogant surety that was alien to this landscape of struggle. In it sat Mr. Jasper Albright, the owner of the bank in town, the sawmill, and the freight line. He was a man made of soft flesh and hard money. Albright was heavy, but his weight was different from May's. Hers was the weight of muscle and bone, of solid, grounded strength. His was the weight of indulgence, a soft, doughy mass that seemed to press outward against the fine wool of his suit. He had a smile that was always in place, a wide, white, perfect thing that did not touch his eyes. It looked as if it had been set there with a trowel. Thomas stiffened as the buggy pulled up. "Albright," he said, the name a flat stone in his mouth. Mr. Albright climbed down, his movements ponderous but practiced. He clapped Thomas on the shoulder, his smile unwavering. "Thomas, my friend, just making my rounds, checking on my investments." And on my friends his eyes, small and shrewd, slid over to May, who stood silently by the porch rail. He looked her up and down, a slow, appraising glance, the kind a man gives a horse he is thinking of buying. "Well now," Albright boomed, his voice slick with false bonhomie. "I see you've found some new help. A sturdy specimen, Thomas. Very substantial. Good for the heavy work, I imagine." The words landed like stones. Specimen. Substantial. Heavy work. He spoke of her as if she were a draft animal, a piece of equipment. The old armor, which had grown comfortable in the quiet respect of the ranch, suddenly felt thin. The familiar sting of humiliation pricked at her, but her face remained a mask of placid stillness. She did not grant him the satisfaction of a reaction. She simply met his gaze, her dark eyes holding his for a moment before she turned and went back inside the house. That night, the quiet of the dinner table was heavier than usual. Thomas pushed his food around his plate. Finally, he looked up, his face etched with worry. "He's calling the note," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The last one. I don't have it. I thought I had another season." "Let me see the papers," May said. Thomas looked startled. "It's just numbers. Legal words. It's a mess." He ran a hand through his hair. "I can't make heads or tails of it." "I can read," May said. "I can do accounts." The Mission sisters were very thorough. It was another surprise, another hidden depth to this woman he had hired to cook his meals. He hesitated for only a moment before rising and retrieving the worn leather satchel that held the ranch's lifeblood. He dumped the contents onto the table, a chaotic pile of receipts, loan agreements, contracts, and deeds, all bearing the elegant letterhead of the Albright Bank and Trust. For the next 3 nights, after the house was asleep, May sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp, poring over the papers. The numbers did not lie. The words, once you untangled their serpentine clauses, did not lie either. She was not just reading papers. She was reading a story. It was a story of calculated kindness and patient predation. She found the first loan, a small one, offered right after Thomas's wife, Mary, had fallen ill. It was offered at a generous rate, a gesture of friendship from Albright. Then another, for the funeral expenses. Then a larger one for seed and stock, with a slightly higher interest rate. And then another, and another, each one compounding the debt, each one adding a new clause, a new lien. The final piece of the puzzle was a revised land grant document she found tucked inside an old deed. It was dense with legal jargon, but May read it 3 times until she understood. In exchange for a temporary reduction in his loan payment 2 years ago, Thomas had unwittingly signed away the primary water rights to the North Spring, the one that never ran dry, even in the worst droughts. The contract stipulated that the rights would revert to the bank upon default of any subsequent loan. It was a masterpiece of patient, methodical theft. Albright had not just been lending money. He had been spinning a web. He didn't want the failing ranch. He wanted the water. With those rights, he could sell water to the entire valley or deny it, controlling the fate of every other rancher. He had been waiting, with his trowel smile, for Thomas to fail. She laid it all out for him on the 4th night. She placed the papers in chronological order on the table, a timeline of his own ruin. She pointed to the signatures, the clauses, the escalating numbers. "He was never your friend," she said, her voice low and even. He helped you when you were weak, so you would not see the knife in his other hand. Thomas stared at the papers, his face pale. He shook his head, a gesture of denial. No, he whispered. He paid for the doctor for Mary. He sat with me at the funeral. He said he was a Christian man. A man can say many things, May said, her gaze steady. These papers say only one thing. He has been buying your water, piece by piece, with your own debt. When he calls the note, he will take the land, but he will keep the water. It is the water he has wanted all along. The truth was there, cold and undeniable, written in ink and sealed with wax. Thomas looked from the damning papers to the woman who had unearthed them. He saw her still face, her calm, intelligent eyes. She was not gloating. She was not angry. She was simply showing him what was real. In that moment, he had a choice. He could cling to the comforting lie of a friend's betrayal, or he could accept the harsh truth brought to him by a stranger. He took a deep breath, the air rattling in his lungs. He looked at the woman who had healed his land, who had coaxed his daughter from her shell of silence, who had earned the respect of his crustiest friend, and who now was showing him the path out of a trap he hadn't even known he was in. All right, May, he said, and her name, spoken with such weight, was a vow. It was the sealing of an alliance. All right, what do we do? Their quiet war on Jasper Albright began, but winter declared a war of its own first. It came early and with a savage fury, a blizzard that descended from the mountains without warning. The sky turned a bruised purple, and then the world dissolved into a howling vortex of white. Snow piled in drifts against the house and barns, burying fences and erasing the landscape. The temperature plummeted. The greatest danger was to the livestock, especially the pregnant heifers, the future of the herd. They were huddled in the old north barn, its roof already groaning under the weight of the snow. On the second night of the storm, a sound like a cannon shot ripped through the wind's howl. A main support beam in the north barn had cracked. Thomas, Jed, and May fought their way through the waist-deep snow, the wind tearing at them. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the dust of old hay and the panicked breath of the animals. The massive central ridgepole, a timber the thickness of a man's chest, was sagging ominously. The beam beneath it had split, and the entire roof was threatening to collapse. Get them out, Thomas yelled over the roar. Jed, the back gate. As Jed scrambled to open the frozen gate, Thomas began trying to herd the terrified heifers toward it. But they were crazed with fear, bunching up against the far wall, directly under the failing roof. Another deep groan echoed through the barn, and dust and splinters rained down. The ridgepole sank another foot. Sarah, who was supposed to be in the house, had followed them. She stood just inside the main door, a small, terrified figure. One of the heifers, blind with panic, bolted toward her. At the same instant, with a final, splintering crack, the broken support beam gave way entirely. The massive ridgepole began to fall. It all happened in a heartbeat. Thomas screamed Sarah's name. He was too far away. The pole was coming down directly where the child stood. But May was closer. She did not hesitate. She moved with a speed that seemed impossible for her size, shoving the child toward Thomas with one arm. With the other, and her whole body, she threw herself under the falling timber. She did not try to stop it. She met it. She planted her feet wide, bent her knees, and caught the immense weight of it across her shoulders and back. The impact drove her down to one knee. A gasp of pure agony was torn from her lungs. The weight was colossal, a force meant to crush. But she held. Her muscles screamed, her bones grated, but she held the roof up. She was the new support beam, a pillar of flesh and blood and sheer, indomitable will. The cattle, she grunted, her voice tight with strain. Get them out. Now. Her heroism broke the spell of their fear. Thomas, after shoving a stunned Sarah back toward the house, worked with Jed, their movements now frantic and efficient. They drove the panicked heifers out into the blizzard's fury, where they would have a better chance than in a collapsing barn. May held the beam. The world narrowed to the crushing weight on her back, the fire in her muscles, the grit of the dirt under her knee. It seemed an eternity. Finally, Thomas was beside her. They're out, May. Let it go. She couldn't. The weight had settled. If she moved, it would all come down on top of her. Prop it, she gasped. Need to prop it. Thomas and Jed, working together, dragged a heavy feed trough and several smaller beams into place, building a crude but sturdy support column next to her. When it was set, Thomas put a hand on her shoulder. "Okay, May. On 3. You have to move fast." He counted. On 3. She threw herself sideways, rolling away as the ridgepole settled onto the makeshift prop with a deafening crash. The rest of the roof held. She lay on the frozen ground, gasping for air, every muscle in her body screaming. Thomas knelt beside her. He reached out, and, with a hand that trembled, he gently touched her face, brushing snow from her cheek. Then he put his arm under her good shoulder and helped her sit up. He didn't let go. He kept his arm around her, a solid, grounding presence in the howling chaos. "You saved her," he said, his voice ragged with awe and gratitude. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not at her strength or her skill, but at the woman herself, who had put her body between his child and certain death. "You saved us." He pulled her into a clumsy, desperate embrace, holding on as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had come apart. May, aching and exhausted, allowed herself to lean into him, just for a moment, and feel the simple, profound warmth of his touch. Jasper Albright, thwarted by the weather, made his next move as soon as the roads were clear. He could not break May's body, so he tried to break her name. He went to work on the town. The whispers started in the general store, spread to the saloon, and found fertile ground in the pews of the church. The story he spun was an ugly one. This Chinese woman, this oversized, heathen foreigner, had a strange hold on poor, grieving Thomas Berenger. It wasn't decent, an unmarried woman living out there, practically running the place. She was usurping a man's role. She was an unnatural influence. Rumor, like fire through dry grass, consumed the town's imagination. Faces that had been indifferent now turned hostile. Women pulled their children closer when May came to town for supplies. The rumors reached Eleanor Vance. She was the wife of the town doctor, a woman whose opinion carried immense weight. She was the self-appointed guardian of the town's decency, a position she held with a fierce, unyielding grip. Her righteousness was born of her own deep wound. She had lost her only child, a boy of 5, to a fever years ago. Her grief had calcified into a rigid set of rules for the world, a desperate attempt to impose order on a universe that had proven to be chaotic and cruel. Incited by Albright's whispers and her own network of concerned ladies, Eleanor Vance rode out to the Barty Ranch. She found May in the yard, teaching Sarah how to properly stake a young fruit tree they had planted in a newly cleared patch of earth. "Mrs. Berenger is not yet cold in her grave," Eleanor began without preamble, her voice tight and clipped. She stayed on her horse, a tactic to maintain her physical and moral high ground. "And you have installed yourself here. The town is talking. It is an unseemly arrangement." May straightened up slowly. She looked at the woman on the horse, at her fine bombazine riding dress, her tightly pinned hair, and the profound pain in her eyes. May saw past the judgment to the grief that fueled it. She did not get defensive. She did not return the woman's fire. Instead, her gaze drifted past Eleanor, toward the distant silhouette of the town and the church spire. "When I am in town," May said, her voice soft, "I have seen the grave you tend by the east wall of the church, the one with the small stone lamb on top." Eleanor Vance flinched as if struck. The mention of her son's grave was a violation of the unspoken rules of their confrontation. "That has nothing to do with this," she said sharply, but her voice wavered. "You keep the weeds away. You plant primroses in the spring," May continued gently, her eyes full of a deep, knowing empathy. "It is a lonely thing to tend a memory. It is a hard thing to make a world that has taken so much from you feel safe again." She was not talking about herself. She was talking about Eleanor. She was looking into the heart of the woman's pain and naming it. The righteous anger drained out of Eleanor Vance, leaving her exposed and trembling. The armor of her decency was no defense against this unexpected wave of pure empathy. She saw May not as a threat, but as another woman who understood the geography of loss. Eleanor stared at May, her mouth opening and closing silently. Then she looked at the child, Sarah, who was standing close to May, her hand tucked into the fold of May's sturdy poplin skirt. She saw the trust in the child's eyes. She saw the life in the newly planted tree. She saw the healing that was happening in this place. Without another word, Eleanor Vance turned her horse and rode away, shaken to her core. Her war on May was over before it had truly begun. Albright, feeling his influence wane, forced the final confrontation. He called a public meeting on the steps of his bank to announce the foreclosure on the Barty Ranch. It was a performance. He intended to paint himself as a sorrowful friend, forced by the sad necessities of business to take the home of a man he respected. The whole town gathered, a somber, curious crowd. He stood on the top step, his soft body encased in a fine suit, his face a mask of pious regret. "My friends, my neighbors," he began, his voice resonating with false sorrow. "It is with the heaviest of hearts that I stand before you today. Our friend, Thomas Berenger, a good man who has suffered much, has fallen on hard times. Despite my every effort to aid him, the bank must fulfill its duty. It is a sad day for us all." As he spoke, a figure moved through the crowd. It was May. She was not dressed for work. She wore a simple, clean dark dress. In her hands, she carried the leather-bound ledger. She walked up the steps until she stood one step below Albright, facing the crowd. "Mr. Albright speaks of sadness," she said, her voice clear and calm, carrying over the silent crowd. "Let us speak of facts." Albright's smile tightened. "This is a private business matter, madam. It has no place here. You made it public business when you gathered the town to watch a man lose his home," May countered, her gaze unwavering. She opened the ledger. "Mr. Albright says he tried to help. This ledger says he gave Thomas Berenger a loan of $200 when his wife was dying. It calls that kindness." She turned a page. "It does not mention that the collateral for that kindness was a lien on the ranch's breeding stock." She continued, her voice a steady, damning litany. She read the dates of the loans, the escalating interest rates, the hidden clauses. She explained, in simple, direct language, how each act of friendship was a turn of the screw. The crowd was utterly silent, listening. Thomas stood at the edge of the crowd, his face grim, letting her fight the battle he had not known how to win. And finally, May said, her voice ringing with clarity, "The final kindness. A deferment of payment, in exchange for a small signature on a complex document." She held up the revised land grant. This document. It gave the bank the rights to the North Spring. Not the ranch. Not the useless, alkali-crusted land. The water. The lifeblood of this entire valley. The crowd stirred, a murmur of understanding and anger rippling through it. They all knew the value of the North Spring. Albright's face, for the first time, lost its smile. It fell away like a plaster mask, revealing the ugly, rapacious man beneath. "Lies," he snarled, his voice losing its polished tone. "The ravings of an interfering, foreign female who has no place among decent folk." He took a step toward her, his face contorted with fury. This is a white man's town. It was his final, fatal mistake. He had revealed the poison in his heart. Before anyone else could react, a clear, strong voice cut through the air. "She has more decency in her little finger than you have in your entire, bloated body." Jasper Albright. Eleanor Vance stepped out from the crowd. She walked up the steps and stood beside May, facing Albright. Her face was blazing with a righteous fury that was now aimed at its proper target. "This woman," Eleanor declared, her voice ringing with conviction, "is a better Christian than you will ever be. She saved a child. She is healing a broken family. She is telling the truth." Then another figure moved. It was Jed, his one arm held stiffly at his side. He walked up the steps and stood on May's other side. He just stood there, a silent, one-armed sentinel, his loyalty absolute. The crowd, seeing their leaders, the arbiter of decency and the soul of the common rancher, flank this outcast woman, finally broke. A chorus of angry shouts erupted, all directed at the man on the top step. Jasper Albright, exposed and defeated, stumbled backward into the doors of his own bank, his power shattered. 2 years passed. The Barty Ranch was transformed. The alkali was a distant memory, the pastures a sea of deep, rich green. The new fruit trees were heavy with blossoms. The house was repaired and painted, the porch solid, the garden a riot of color. It was no longer a place of grief, but a place of quiet, thriving life. It had become a showplace, a testament to what could be built from wreckage. May was the heart of it. She was no longer just the housekeeper or the hired hand. She was the center. Sarah, now a bright, chattering 8-year-old, was her constant shadow, her hand always finding May's. Jed, grumpier than ever in his pronouncements, took his orders from her and her alone, his respect a bedrock foundation. Eleanor Vance was a regular visitor, their friendship a source of quiet strength for them both. They would sit in the kitchen, two women from different worlds, and talk for hours, their shared understanding of loss and renewal a powerful bond. One evening, in the long gold light of late summer, May and Thomas sat on the porch. The air was warm and smelled of hay and roses. For a long time, they sat in a comfortable silence, watching the light fade on the hills. "I remember the first day you came," Thomas said finally, his voice soft in the twilight. "I was at the end of my rope. I was just looking for someone to cook meals and stop the dust from piling up. That's all I thought I needed." He turned to look at her. "I didn't know what I really needed. I needed someone to read the land. I needed someone to mend more than just fences. I needed someone to face down a blizzard and a banker." He shook his head, a small, wondering smile on his face. "I remember what Albright called you. Substantial." He said it like an insult. "The whole world, your whole life. People have probably looked at your size, your strength, and been afraid of it. Or they've mocked it. They called you too much." He leaned forward, his expression earnest, his pale blue eyes full of a deep, quiet reverence. "But your too muchness is what saved us, May. Your bigness held up a roof that would have killed my daughter. Your stubbornness reclaimed land that everyone said was dead. Your strength gave me the courage to fight when I had none left. You weren't too much. You were just enough. You were everything." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a new deed. He unfolded it. "This place, it's not mine to give you. You've earned it as much as I ever did. More, maybe." He pointed to the top of the document. "It says Beringer and May. An equal partnership. If you'll have it." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "I'm not asking you to stay because I need a housekeeper, or a foreman, or even a partner. I'm asking you to stay because Sarah and I, we love you. I love you. I'm asking you to choose this place. To choose us." May looked at him, at this good, quiet man who had finally found his voice. She felt something inside her, a deep, ancient ache, begin to dissolve. The armor, the heavy shield of stillness she had carried for a lifetime, the fortress built of 1,000 slights and a million moments of being made to feel like she was wrong in her own skin. She felt it crack. It fell away from her, piece by piece, turning to dust in the golden light. For the first time, she felt light. She felt seen, not for what she could do, but for who she was. She thought of the journey that brought her here, a journey of 1,000 lonely miles. She thought of the dust and the despair, and she looked at the home she had built, the family she had found, the man she had saved who had, in turn, saved her. All the pain of her past was just a story. This was real. She turned to him, and her face, for so long a still mask, was filled with a light that matched the evening sky. She let out a breath she had been holding her entire life. "Yes,"